It was a monumental era for Uruguay's formative history. Having broken free from Spanish colonial rule in 1830, Uruguay wanted to mark its centenary with a global celebration. They had already clinched gold in football at both the 1924 and 1928 Olympics. In fact, since Olympic tournaments back then were widely regarded as world championships, Uruguay still proudly wears 4 stars on its jersey today to commemorate those victories. When the FIFA president of the time, Jules Rimet, shared his grand vision with Uruguay, they welcomed it with open arms, laying the foundations for the very first World Cup. Because Uruguay provided maritime transit support to the European nations making the voyage, the 1930 tournament is affectionately remembered as the Sailors' World Cup. Due to the sheer grueling nature of travel back then, only 4 European teams could make the trip, and the inaugural final saw a fierce clash between neighbors Argentina and Uruguay. In a bizarre twist of pride, both nations insisted on playing with their own manufactured ball. Thus, the first half was played with Argentina's ball and the second with Uruguay's. Argentina went into the tunnel at halftime leading 2-1. However, spearheaded by their talismanic captain Nazazi, the hosts turned the tide with an inspiring halftime team talk. Scoring 3 unanswered goals in the second half, Uruguay was crowned history's first ever world champion in front of a roaring crowd of 80,000 at the colossal Centenario Stadium in Montevideo. The tournament's top marksman, Argentina's Guillermo Stabile, who netted 8 goals, would soon set sail for Serie A to join Genoa after his stellar performance. The World Cup concept was an instant hit. Anticipation reached a fever pitch for the 1934 tournament, largely because football had been dropped from the 1932 Los Angeles Olympics following a bitter dispute between the IOC and FIFA over the eligibility of professional players. Despite heavy political friction, Italian leader Benito Mussolini ensured the 1934 World Cup was brought to Italy, expanding the roster to 16 teams. 12 slots were allocated to Europe, 3 to the Americas, and the sole remaining spot went to Asia and Africa. Remarkably, despite being the hosts, Italy still had to play through the qualifiers, remaining the only host nation in history to ever earn its place the hard way. Meanwhile, the defending champions, Uruguay, bitterly boycotted the tournament because only 4 European teams had bothered to accept their invitation 4 years prior. In the end, victory belonged to Italy, who triumphed 2-1 on home soil after extra time. While historians often point out the heavily controversial refereeing decisions influenced by Mussolini's fascist regime, it was undeniable that Italy possessed a golden generation, a fact they cemented by winning the 1936 Olympics soon after. The tournament ultimately belonged to the legendary Giuseppe Meazza, who truly left his indelible mark on the world stage. By 1938, the World Cup had cemented its place as a highly anticipated quadrennial tradition that every nation craved to be a part of. A staggering 32 teams applied to enter, making pre-tournament qualifiers mandatory for the first time in history. However, the tournament was deeply overshadowed by global unrest, unfolding on the catastrophic brink of World War II. Austria was forced to withdraw following its annexation by Nazi Germany, while Spain was completely torn apart by its own bloody civil war. Furthermore, many South American nations refused to play in France, boycotting the event out of frustration that the hosting rotation had not returned to their continent. The defending champions, Italy, alongside the hosts, France, received automatic qualification, initiating a tradition that would endure all the way until 2002. It was during this tournament that the foundational seeds of Brazil's legendary Joga Bonito were sown. Their star, Leonidas, famously played barefoot during a rain-soaked match and was dubbed the Rubber Man due to his astonishing flexibility. Yet the trophy didn't go to Brazil. It was clinched once again by Italy, driven by the military-like tactical discipline of their iconic manager, Vittorio Pozzo. To this day, Pozzo remains the only manager in football history to win 2 World Cups. The devastating wake of World War II had rendered the 1942 and 1946 tournaments impossible. In a world still reeling from the scars of war, Brazil stepped up as host, eager to establish a new footballing dynasty far removed from geopolitical trauma. This was the tournament where England finally agreed to grace the World Cup stage, and a formerly aggrieved Uruguay made their grand return. Turkey had successfully qualified as one of the 16 finalists, but was forced to painfully withdraw due to the severe post-war economic conditions that made the hefty financial burden of traveling to South America impossible to bear. To guarantee their coronation, Brazil constructed the breathtaking 200,000 capacity Maracanã Stadium. In a unique format where the champion was decided by a final group stage rather than a traditional knockout, the decisive ultimate match came down to Brazil and Uruguay. In front of 173,830 ticketed spectators and an estimated unregistered crowd of well over 200,000 packing the iconic arena, Uruguay pulled off the unthinkable, winning the match to claim the World Cup once more. The heroic efforts of Brazil's Ademir, who finished as top scorer with 9 goals, were simply not enough. This national tragedy, forever etched in football lore as the Maracanazo, the Maracanã blow, became one of the greatest heartbreaks in sports history. The trauma ran so deep that Brazil deemed the white jerseys worn that fateful day cursed, vowing never to wear them again. With the 1950 edition held in South America, FIFA brought the tournament back to European soil, with Switzerland chosen as the host nation. However, the qualifiers birthed an extraordinary tale. Turkey and Spain were pitted against each other in a high-stakes playoff for a spot in the finals. Spain comfortably won the first leg 4-1 in Madrid, but Turkey bounced back with a 1-0 victory in the return fixture. In an era completely devoid of goal average or goal difference rules, a third decisive match had to be played on neutral ground. When that playoff in Rome ended in a tense 2-2 deadlock, FIFA resorted to drawing lots. The fate of both nations rested in the hands of a 14-year-old Italian boy named Luigi Franco, who picked the winning lot from the stands. Fortune favored Turkey, granting them entry to their very first World Cup finals. Meanwhile, the magical Magyars of Hungary had been entirely invincible. Since losing to Austria on May 14, 1950, they hadn't tasted defeat for 4 straight years leading up to the final. They had even ruthlessly dismantled West Germany 8-3 in the group stages. Yet against all odds, equipped with revolutionary screw-in studs to handle the muddy pitch, West Germany shocked the world by defeating Hungary 3-2 in the final to lift the trophy. For Germany, Fritz Walter, a man who had survived a prisoner of war camp during World War II, emerged as the icon of the tournament alongside Ferenc Puskás. While Puskás represented pure artistic beauty, Walter embodied relentless resilience. Immortalized forever as the Miracle of Bern, this final marked the exact moment Germany transformed into an absolute superpower of world football. If you're enjoying the video so far, please hit that like button. Brazil was still deeply haunted by the 1950 trauma at the Maracanã, yet they arrived with one of the most gifted squads the world had ever seen. The 1958 tournament in Sweden would revolutionize the beautiful game in 2 profound ways. First, it marked the death of the traditional WM formation, replaced by a perfectly calibrated, modern 4-2-4 system that ushered in the era of tactical supremacy. Second, it introduced the world to a 17-year-old boy named Pelé. Virtually unknown and expected to merely warm the bench when the tournament kicked off, he would evolve into the single most important figure in football history. When the electrifying Garrincha on the right wing was paired with the youthful genius of Pelé, Brazil became an unstoppable force of nature. After netting the lone, decisive winner against Wales in the quarterfinals, Pelé blasted a stunning hat-trick past France in the semis, catapulting him into instant global stardom. Capping it off with a spectacular brace in the final, Pelé guided Brazil to a dominant 5-2 victory over hosts Sweden to secure their first ever World Cup title. To this day, this remains the only time Brazil has ever lifted the trophy on European soil. Meanwhile, French forward Just Fontaine etched his name into eternity by scoring an astonishing 13 goals, a record for the most goals in a single World Cup that stands untouched to this day. Just 2 years before Chile was set to host the tournament, a horrific tragedy plunged the nation into deep mourning. Devastated by a catastrophic 9.5 magnitude earthquake, the most powerful ever recorded in human history, Chile saw an estimated death toll reaching nearly 6,000 lives, according to some sources. Yet, the nation transformed the tournament into a matter of absolute national pride. The words of the organizing committee president, Carlos Dietborn, became a powerful rallying cry. Because we have nothing left, we will do everything. Damaged infrastructure was rebuilt at a breathtaking pace, ensuring the tournament kicked off right on schedule. Following the jaw-dropping artistry of Brazil in '58, the world expected a festival of beautiful football in Chile. However, the crown jewel of the tournament, Pelé, suffered a tournament-ending injury in just the second match. Instead of beauty, the tournament became defined by brutal aggression. The violence reached a boiling point in the infamous Battle of Santiago between Chile and Italy, a match so violently physical that local police were forced to storm the pitch to restore order. Yet, even in the shadow of these brutal clashes and without Pelé, Brazil marched on, carried entirely by the mesmerizing individual brilliance of Garrincha. They dismantled the hosts Chile by banging in 4 goals in the semifinals, before cruising past Czechoslovakia 3-1 in the final to capture back-to-back world titles. Meanwhile, the legendary Lev Yashin, widely regarded as the best goalkeeper of the era, and who would win the Ballon d'Or the following year as the only keeper to ever do so, shocked the world with uncharacteristic, costly blunders during the Soviet Union's quarter-final exit against Chile, sparked debates for years to come. Having largely isolated themselves from the early chapters of World Cup history, England was finally ready to assert its dominance on the global stage. Bidding against heavyweights like Italy, Germany, and Spain, England successfully won the rights to host the tournament. However, before a ball was even kicked, African nations collectively withdrew from the tournament in a massive protest against FIFA's qualifying quotas. On the pitch, England put on a masterclass at home, utilizing a revolutionary new 4-4-2 system dubbed the Wingless Wonders. Perhaps their biggest stroke of luck was the shocking group stage exit of Brazil, who were dumped out after a defeat to Eusebio's brilliant Portugal side. Pelé had curled in a magnificent free kick against Bulgaria in the opener, but was forced to miss the next game through injury. Though he courageously returned for the final group match, he was relentlessly hacked down by the Portuguese defenders, eventually limping off the pitch on crutches. The grand finale between England and West Germany ended 2-2 in normal time, forcing extra time. It was there that Geoff Hurst scored one of the most fiercely debated goals in football history. A shot that struck the crossbar, where questions still linger today over whether the ball fully crossed the line, propelling England to the title. Hurst etched his name into folklore by netting a historic hat-trick in the 4-2 triumph, played out in front of a staggering 100,000 spectators at a packed Wembley Stadium. Bobby Charlton was the undisputed pulse of the tournament, pulling the strings flawlessly in the English midfield. Meanwhile, the sensational Eusebio, who bagged 9 goals, proved that Portugal's club-level rise was ready to explode onto the international stage. And a 20-year-old Franz Beckenbauer, with his sublime grace in the German midfield, gave the world a scintillating preview of the legend he would become in the decades to follow. To many purists, this was the definitive tournament that truly made the World Cup what it is today. A glorious renaissance of the beautiful game that had been lost since 1958. Broadcast in vibrant color for the very first time, football, like the rest of the world, suddenly felt infinitely more vivid. Hosted by Mexico, the tournament grabbed global headlines long before kickoff. In a shocking escalation of political tension, a fierce qualifying playoff between El Salvador and Honduras actually triggered a literal war between the two nations. Tragically, El Salvador ended up finishing the tournament they had fought a war over without scoring a single goal. Desperate to erase the humiliation of 4 years prior, Brazil prepared for the tournament with military-like intensity. Pelé, who had vowed never to play in a World Cup again after the brutality of 1966, was successfully coaxed out of international retirement. Flanked by a glittering attacking armada featuring Tostão, Jairzinho, and Rivellino, they unleashed what is widely considered the most aesthetically sublime football ever witnessed in tournament history. As Brazil brought color to television screens, Pelé definitively cemented his status as the undisputed king of football. Storming through both the qualifiers and the final tournament without drawing or losing a single match, Brazil completed one of the most dominant championship runs in history. In an era where Italy was pioneering its ultra-defensive philosophy, Brazil staged a beautiful rebellion, putting 4 goals past the Italians in the final. This tournament also went down in history for Uruguay's resurgence after a long drought on the big stage. By winning the tournament for a historic 3rd time, regulations dictated that Brazil earned the right to keep the trophy permanently. The physical Jules Rimet trophy belonged to Brazil forever. Meanwhile, West Germany's Gerd Müller claimed the Golden Boot with a ruthless 10 goals. Remarkably, although the yellow and red card system was introduced for the very first time in this tournament, not a single player was shown a red card throughout the entire event. Having consistently left an indelible mark on every tournament, the time had finally come for West Germany to play host. The qualifying rounds delivered a monumental shock as England fell to Poland, failing to book their ticket to the finals. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union was disqualified after refusing to travel to Chile for their playoff match, in protest of the bloody military coup d'état there. The tournament structure underwent a massive overhaul. Dropping the traditional direct knockout quarterfinals, FIFA introduced a second group stage. The winners of these secondary groups would advance straight to the final, while the runners-up battled for 3rd place. History was made when Turkish referee Doğan Babacan brandished the very first red card in World Cup history, sending off Chilean forward Carlos Caselli. This tournament stands as the watershed moment for the commercialization of modern football. It triggered a massive boom in broadcasting rights, lucrative sponsorship deals, and sports betting, forever expanding the global football market. But the revolution wasn't just financial, it was deeply tactical. Johan Cruyff mesmerized the world with the breathtaking philosophy of total football, a system where every single outfield player fluidly swapped roles to attack and defend in unison. It completely captivated the globe from that moment on. The final became an epic clash of titans, the tactical avant-garde of the Netherlands against the clinical brilliance of the West German hosts. It was a magnificent international reflection of the era-defining club rivalry between Ajax and Bayern Munich. Barely a minute into the game, Cruyff embarked on a dazzling, slaloming run to win a penalty and put the Dutch ahead. But the resilient Germans fought back magnificently to claim the crown. Franz Beckenbauer stood tall as the undeniable titan of the tournament, while a sensational Poland side, who had famously knocked out England to get there, stunned Brazil in the 3rd place playoff to finish a historic 3rd. This remains one of the most politically charged and controversial tournaments in sports history. Having fallen under the iron fist of dictator Jorge Videla following a violent military coup just 2 years prior, many argued Argentina was entirely unfit to host and should be heavily boycotted. The grim reality of the political crisis bled directly onto the pitch. The black bands painted at the base of the goalposts were a silent, somber tribute to the thousands of citizens who had mysteriously disappeared under the regime. Visiting teams and international journalists were intentionally sequestered in remote accommodations, meticulously hidden away from the grim reality of what was unfolding on Argentina's streets. While rumors swirled that Johan Cruyff's shocking refusal to participate was a principled stance against this brutal political climate, his autobiography later revealed the decision was actually rooted in deeply private family security concerns. Domestically, the tournament opened amidst public outrage over the controversial exclusion of a 17-year-old prodigy named Diego Maradona. Furthermore, Argentina shamelessly manipulated the tournament schedule to their advantage. By kicking off their matches late after their rivals had already finished playing, they possessed an unfair psychological edge. The group stages also witnessed a bizarre logistical blunder. Both France and Hungary turned up to pitch wearing their white away kits, causing a massive delay. Desperate for a fix, officials rushed in local club Atletico Kimberley's green and white striped shirts, forcing the French players to play in borrowed jerseys. Suspicion reached a boiling point in the second group stage when Argentina, needing a commanding 4-goal victory to qualify, utterly demolished Peru 6-0. This highly controversial scoreline allowed them to leapfrog bitter rivals Brazil on goal difference. With group winners advancing straight to the final, Argentina secured the showpiece match, relegating a furious Brazil to the third-place playoff. In the grand finale, inspired by the breathtaking brilliance of Mario Kempes, Argentina overcame the Netherlands to lift the trophy, capturing their first ever World Cup title on home soil. The 1982 tournament in Spain saw the roster expand to 24 teams, paving the way for nations like Algeria, Cameroon, Honduras, Kuwait, and New Zealand to make their historic debuts. Naturally, this forced a format change. 24 teams were split into 6 groups, with a secondary phase featuring 4 groups of 3, where only the group winners punched their tickets to the semifinals. Heading into the tournament, this Brazil squad was widely hailed as their greatest collection of talent since the Pelé era. Boasting absolute maestros like Socrates, Zico, Falcao, and Eder, they were overwhelmingly expected to cruise to the title. Instead, this World Cup witnessed one of the most disgraceful chapters in football history. Infamous as the Disgrace of Gijón, a group stage match saw West Germany face Austria. A clinical 1-0 win for the Germans ensured both teams advanced on goal difference, ruthlessly freezing out a phenomenal Algeria side who finished level on points. The second half degenerated into a farcical, low-tempo stroll as both sides shamelessly played out the exact scoreline they needed. This blatant collusion prompted widespread outrage, forcing FIFA to take swift action. From that day forward, the final group stage matches would always kick off simultaneously to prevent such match fixing. This was also the grand introduction of Diego Armando Maradona to the World Cup stage. An iconic photograph from the opening match showing 6 terrified Belgian defenders scrambling to form a wall against him became an instant, timeless image. Yet, trapped in a brutal second-round group with Brazil and Italy, Argentina crashed out, with a frustrated Maradona receiving a straight red card in the 85th minute against Brazil. The decisive clash between Brazil and Italy became an all-time classic. Stifling the beautiful game with rigid defensive grit, Italy triumphed 3-2, propelled by a stunning hat-trick from Paolo Rossi. Rossi's rise was pure cinema. He had been banned from football for nearly 2 years due to a notorious domestic betting scandal, returning to the pitch just months before the tournament. He didn't stop at the hat-trick. He bagged a brace against Poland in the semis and opened the scoring against West Germany in the final to become the undisputed golden boy of the tournament. The other semifinal was a breathtaking epic. Tied 1-1 after 90 minutes, West Germany and France played out an extraordinary extra time that witnessed 4 spectacular goals. Ultimately, West Germany prevailed in a nerve-shredding penalty shootout. However, the match was deeply marred by one of the most horrific fouls in football history. German keeper Toni Schumacher recklessly charged out of his box, leveling France's Patrick Battiston with a brutal mid-air challenge. Battiston was left unconscious on the pitch with a fractured jaw and missing teeth. Yet, as the ball trickled wide, the referee shockingly failed to even call a foul, casually awarding a goal kick. This tournament also marked the official introduction of the Golden Ball Award for the tournament's best player, proudly claimed by Paolo Rossi. Additionally, Italy's 40-year-old captain Dino Zoff set a record as the oldest player to ever win the World Cup, a milestone he still holds to this day. For purists and Brazil romanticists, that tragic second-round exit is still mourned as the day the beautiful game died. Originally awarded to Colombia, severe economic hardships forced the tournament to be relocated to Mexico. This tournament famously birthed the Mexican Wave, the iconic synchronized crowd celebration that took global sports by storm. The format shifted once more, returning to a direct knockout stage immediately following the group rounds. Players were pushed to their absolute physical limits by Mexico's punishing high altitudes. This tournament also officially introduced the footballing lexicon to the phrase "group of death." Uruguay manager Omar Barras coined the term to describe their brutal draw against Denmark, Scotland, and West Germany, a phrase that fans now frantically look for after every single World Cup draw. It proved to be one of the most iconic tournaments in history. The raw, bleeding geopolitical tension of the 1982 Falkland War between Argentina and England reached a boiling point when the two nations were drawn together in the quarterfinals. The Argentine squad was already deeply fueled by resentment following the British Prime Minister's controversial statement that God was with us during the war. Enter Diego Armando Maradona, widely revered as one of the greatest to ever lace up a pair of boots. He shocked England by opening the scoring with his hand. Mere minutes later, he collected the ball in his own half, embarking on a breathtaking slaloming run that saw him dance past the entire English defense to score the undisputed goal of the century. When hounded by reporters after the match about his controversial opener, he cleverly jabbed back at the British political rhetoric, declaring the goal was scored a little with the head of Maradona and a little with the hand of God. Backed by a phenomenal supporting cast, including Valdano, Burruchaga, and Ruggeri, Maradona's Argentina defeated West Germany in a thrilling final to lift their second World Cup. Meanwhile, France, anchored by their legendary Magic Square diamond midfield of Platini, Tigana, Gires, and Luis Fernandez, secured third place ahead of a surprise package Belgium side. Naturally, the golden ball belonged to none other than Maradona. Maradona's earth-shattering impact, first at Barcelona and later at Napoli, forced world football to retreat into deeply defensive, cynical shapes. Given that the tournament unfolded in Italy, the historic spiritual home of Catenaccio, it was hardly a surprise that it became the lowest-scoring World Cup in history. This tactical stagnation became so severe that it forced a historic revolution, the introduction of the back pass rule. Teams had become entirely obsessed with negative, low-block defensive structures, constantly cycling the ball back to their goalkeepers alongside a suffocating number of tactical fouls. Tensions reached a fever pitch when Maradona's Argentina clashed with the host nation, Italy, in a blockbuster semi-final. In an extraordinary display of psychological warfare, Maradona, then a living deity for Napoli, appealed directly to the local Neapolitan crowd, reminding them how they had been systematically marginalized by the rest of Italy for decades, boldly declaring, "For 364 days a year, you are treated like foreigners in your own country. Today, you must support Argentina." It proved that a single player could transcend national boundaries. Argentina ultimately prevailed in a nerve-shredding penalty shootout. The final was a highly anticipated rematch of 1986 against West Germany, but this time, Argentina fell to a clinical 86th-minute penalty tucked away by Andreas Bremer. As West Germany claimed their historic third star, they were guided from the dugout by Der Kaiser, Franz Beckenbauer, who became the first man to win the trophy as both a captain and a manager. Italy's surprise package, Salvatore Toto Schillaci, captured the hearts of the nation, finishing as top scorer. Meanwhile, Cameroon carved out an immortal piece of history, becoming the first African nation to ever reach the quarterfinals. Their iconic 38-year-old super sub, Roger Milla, routinely electrified the tournament off the bench, famously dismantling Colombia with two sensational extra-time goals. In a bold bid to transform football into a colossal commercial empire, FIFA brought the World Cup to the United States. To maximize primetime television ratings, matches were brutally scheduled under the scorching, relentless midday July sun, leaving players on the absolute verge of collapse. The tournament witnessed the definitive end of an era when Diego Maradona tested positive for ephedrine and was banished from the competition. The haunting image of Maradona being led away hand in hand by a medical official became one of the most tragic images in football history. The tournament culminated in an epic showdown between Roberto Baggio, who had single-handedly carried a struggling Italy to the final, and a lethal new Brazil side spearheaded by Romario and Bebeto. The final ground down to a nerve-shredding penalty shootout. In a cruel twist of fate, Baggio, the undisputed savior of his nation, blasted the decisive penalty high into the Los Angeles sky, instantly transforming into a tragic hero. Brazil secured their fourth crown after a grueling 24-year drought, while Baggio was left to endure decades of haunting heartbreak and public scrutiny. This Brazilian side was starkly different, adopting a highly pragmatic, European-style defensive structure. The summer of '94 was a brilliant tapestry of fairy tales and deep tragedies. A spectacular Sweden squad boasting Larsson, Brolin, Kenneth Anderson and Dahlin stormed into the semi-finals alongside a ferocious Bulgaria side driven by the genius of Hristo Stoichkov. Russia's Oleg Salenko etched his name into the record books by hammering 5 goals past Cameroon in a single match. In that very same game, the iconic 42-year-old Roger Milla netted Cameroon's consolation goal, cementing his place as the oldest goal scorer in World Cup history. But the darkest, most heartbreaking tragedy belonged to Colombia. Having arrived as heavy dark horse favorites after famously demolishing Argentina 5-0 in Buenos Aires, a star-studded squad featuring Valderrama and Asprilla utterly buckled under immense pressure, crashing out rock bottom of their group. Tragically, just 10 days after returning home, defender Andres Escobar, who had accidentally scored a costly own goal against the United States, was brutally shot dead outside a nightclub, a grim reminder of a nation consumed by chaos. Ricky Martin's La Copa de la Vida blasted across the globe, becoming arguably the most iconic World Cup anthem in history. Geopolitical tensions dissolved into a profound message of peace during the group stage, when Iranian players presented white roses to their United States counterparts before kickoff. The two teams stood shoulder to shoulder, posing for an unforgettable joint photograph. The absolute fairy tale of the tournament was Croatia, making their explosive World Cup debut just years after gaining independence. Anchored by a rock-solid 3-man defense and driven by the lethal boots of tournament top scorer Davor Šuker, they secured a stunning third-place finish. This tournament also witnessed history's very first golden goal, scored by France's Laurent Blanc to break a grueling round of 16 deadlock against Paraguay. England made their grand return after missing out in '94, introducing a lightning-fast teenager named Michael Owen, who would be crowned the tournament's best young player. However, England's campaign collapsed in a highly volatile clash against Argentina, where David Beckham was sent off after falling into a clever provocation by Diego Simeone, returning home to find himself public enemy number 1. The hero of that penalty shootout, Argentine keeper Carlos Roa, would shock the world in the summer of '99 by abruptly walking away from football at the peak of his career. Deeply convinced the world would end with the new millennium, he left to focus entirely on his faith. When the apocalypse failed to materialize, he quietly returned to the pitch. The grand finale pitted the defending champions, Brazil, against the hosts, France. Decades later, tournament organizer Michel Platini would shockingly confess that they had subtly manipulated the draw to ensure the two heavyweights could not meet until the final. The build-up to the match triggered one of the greatest conspiracy theories in sports history. When the official team sheets were handed out an hour before kickoff, Brazil's transcendent superstar, Ronaldo, was inexplicably missing from the starting lineup. As chaos erupted in the media lounge, a revised sheet emerged with Ronaldo reinstated. he looked a ghost of himself on the pitch, sparking immediate rumors that corporate sponsors had forced a medically unfit player onto the field. Years later, Ronaldo revealed the terrifying truth. He had suffered an unexplained convulsive fit in his hotel room that afternoon. Discovered by a panicked Roberto Carlos, he was rushed to the hospital while the team departed for the stadium. Arriving at the ground mere minutes before kickoff, Ronaldo begged to play, and a shaken manager obliged. But he was powerless to stop a rampant France. Driven by 2 bullet headers from Zinedine Zidane, France cruised to a dominant 3-0 victory to claim their first ever World Cup. The historic triumph sparked a beautiful cultural awakening across the country. Celebrated for its multicultural brilliance, the historic slogan "Black, Blanc, Beurre" became a powerful national symbol of unity and social integration. Breaking completely fresh ground, the World Cup left its traditional European and American strongholds for the first time, co-hosted by the vibrant nations of South Korea and Japan. It was undoubtedly one of the most colorful, electric tournaments ever witnessed. However, it was deeply marred by heavy allegations of refereeing bias, aimed at driving the host nations deep into the knockout rounds. A string of highly controversial decisions that saw South Korea dramatically eliminate European giants Italy and Spain left their opponents absolutely furious. In a shocking display of petulance, An Jong-hwan, the man who scored the historic golden goal that knocked out Italy, had his club contract instantly terminated by Perugia's eccentric president Luciano Gaucci, who declared he had no intention of paying a man who ruined Italian football. The opening match delivered an immediate, earth-shattering shock as the defending champions, France, were stunned 1-0 by tournament debutants Senegal, initiating a horrific run that saw the French crash out bottom of their group without scoring a single goal. The fairy tale continued, with both Turkey and South Korea staging miraculous runs to the semi-finals. Though South Korea fell to Germany and Turkey was narrowly edged out by Brazil, both won the hearts of the world. Turkey went on to defeat South Korea in a thrilling third-place playoff, securing the highest and most celebrated finish in their footballing history. In the grand finale, a redemption-fueled Ronaldo spearheaded Brazil past Germany, capturing a historic 5th star for the Seleção. Their iconic captain Cafu carved his name into legend, becoming the only player in history to feature in 3 consecutive World Cup finals. Despite falling short at the final hurdle, Germany's colossus Oliver Kahn became the first and only goalkeeper in history to claim the prestigious Golden Ball. Beyond the football, the tournament was a pop culture phenomenon of bizarre hairstyles, Ronaldo's unique half-shaved look, and Turkey's Ümit Davala with his iconic mohawk became instantly recognizable global trends. Italy arrived in Germany under the dark, suffocating cloud of the explosive Calciopoli domestic match-fixing scandal. Yet, this crisis served as the ultimate catalyst, forging an unbreakable bond within the squad. Mirroring their exact build-up to 1982, a preparation marred by disgrace would once again culminate in absolute glory for the Italians. This tournament stands unique as the only World Cup in history where not a single hat-trick was scored. In a fascinating geopolitical anomaly, Serbia and Montenegro competed as a single, unified team, despite having officially split into 2 independent nations just weeks before kickoff. It also marked the historic dawn of a new era, serving as the very first World Cup for 2 teenagers who would dominate the sport for the next 2 decades: Lionel Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo. Germany's thrilling 4-2 victory over Costa Rica set a record as the highest-scoring opening match in history, a fixture that permanently shifted the tradition from the defending champions opening the tournament to the host nation. The tournament quickly dissolved into disciplinary chaos, highlighted by the most violent match in World Cup history between Portugal and the Netherlands. Dubbed the Battle of Nuremberg, Russian referee Valentin Ivanov brandished a staggering 16 yellow cards and 4 red cards in an absolute bloodbath. In another monumental officiating blunder, English referee Graham Paul shockingly showed Croatia's Josip Simunic 3 yellow cards in a single match against Australia, completely forgetting he had already booked him before finally sending him off after the third. Hosted across Germany, the tournament saw Italy march relentlessly to the final, driven by the imperial defensive masterclass of Fabio Cannavaro and the sublime vision of Andrea Pirlo. Standing in their way was a resurgent France, carried by a magical Zinedine Zidane. The defending champions, Brazil, boasting a terrifying magic quartet of Ronaldo, Ronaldinho, Kaká, and Adriano, were utterly dismantled in the quarterfinals by one of the greatest individual masterclasses ever witnessed on a pitch, courtesy of Zidane. Having announced he would retire permanently after the tournament, Zidane was desperate for a fairy tale ending. He achieved immortality, though not in the way anyone envisioned. Deep into extra time, provoked into a fierce war of words by Marco Materazzi, Zidane lost his composure and delivered a shocking, thunderous headbutt straight to the Italian defender's chest. His iconic walk past the World Cup trophy into the tunnel remains one of the most dramatic images in sports history. As the final ground down to a penalty shootout, Italy struck with clinical perfection, finally exorcising the painful ghosts of Baggio's '94 heartbreak to claim their 4th world title. History was made as the World Cup crossed onto the African continent for the very first time, hosted by a vibrant South Africa. The tournament became instantly synonymous with the relentless, deafening drone of the vuvuzela echoing through the stadiums. Shakira's infectious Waka Waka exploded globally, cementing itself as arguably the most beloved World Cup anthem ever written. On the pitch, the official match ball, the Jabulani, triggered massive controversy, with frustrated goalkeepers blasting its erratic, completely unpredictable flight path. In a staggering turn of events, both finalists from 2006, France and Italy, suffered humiliating group stage exits. The French campaign collapsed into a historic national scandal as players mutinied against manager Raymond Domenech, staging a blatant training strike on global television. Many called it cosmic justice after France had qualified through a highly controversial Thierry Henry handball against Ireland in the playoffs. In the aftermath, superstars like Anelka, Evra, and Ribéry faced heavy international bans. The tournament also delivered fascinating family history. Honduras fielded the trio of Jerry, Johnny, and Wilson Palacios, the first time 3 brothers featured in a single squad, while the Boateng brothers, Kevin Prince and Jerome, famously clashed on opposite sides representing Ghana and Germany respectively. Meanwhile, Diego Maradona captivated the world's media as the charismatic manager of Argentina. Though the blockbuster partnership of Maradona and Messi promised a fairy tale, the Albiceleste were ruthlessly dismantled 4-0 by a clinical Germany in the quarter-finals. Germany had already courted controversy in the round of 16 against England. Despite a 4-1 German triumph, Frank Lampard was denied a blatant goal when his shot struck the crossbar and clearly crossed the line, triggering furious debates that accelerated the push for goal line technology. In the other bracket, the Netherlands stunned Brazil 2-1. This marked Brazil's first defeat in a World Cup held outside Europe, excluding penalty shootouts, since the tragic Maracanazo of 1950. Uruguay marched into their first semi-final in 40 years, with talismanic captain Diego Forlán earning the Golden Ball as player of the tournament. Yet, it was Luis Suarez who hijacked the global headlines. In the final seconds of extra time against Ghana, Suarez deliberately blocked a certain goal-bound shot on the line with his hands, receiving an immediate red card. With the semi-finals on his boots, Ghana's Asamoah Gyan tragically rattled the penalty off the crossbar, allowing Uruguay to advance in the ensuing shootout. Tactically, the tournament belonged to Spain, who swept through Africa playing the mesmerizing, short-passing tiki-taka philosophy pioneered by Pep Guardiola at Barcelona. The masters of possession marched through the knockouts with a string of clinical 1-0 victories to book their place in the final against Bert van Marwijk's Netherlands. Though the Dutch had reached the final for the first time in 32 years, their legendary icon, Johan Cruyff, bitterly condemned the team's overly physical, cynical tactics, branding it an absolute betrayal of the beautiful Dutch style. In an incredibly hostile, card-heavy final, Spain finally broke the deadlock in extra time via a dramatic Andres Iniesta strike, capturing their first ever World Cup. In doing so, they became the first nation to ever lose their opening match and bounce back to win the tournament. A run defined by Iker Casillas' legendary game-saving stop against Arjen Robben in the 61st minute. Football returned to its spiritual home as Brazil opened its doors to the world, marking the first South American tournament since 1978. However, the build-up was heavily clouded by fierce social unrest as the government faced massive backlash for aggressively clearing out low-income favelas to shield wealthy international tourists from the country's stark realities. On the pitch, the tournament stepped into the modern era, introducing vanishing referee spray and cutting-edge goal line technology for the very first time. The breakout sensation of the summer was Colombia's James Rodriguez, who captured the world's imagination to win the Golden Boot. The tournament also witnessed a legendary individual display from United States goalkeeper Tim Howard, who pulled off a staggering, record-breaking 16 saves in a heroic round of 16 clash against Belgium. Meanwhile, the infamous Champions Curse struck with ruthless precision. The defending champions, Spain, were dumped out in the group stage after losing their opening 2 matches. Their demise began with a humiliating 5-1 demolition by the Netherlands, highlighted by an unforgettable, gravity-defying diving header from Robin van Persie. Louis van Gaal's brilliant tactical mind took center stage in the quarterfinals against Costa Rica, bringing on substitute keeper Tim Krul in the 120th minute solely for the penalty shootout. The gamble paid off spectacularly as Krul saved 2 penalties to send the Dutch through. That very same Costa Rica side emerged as the ultimate underdog story of the tournament, miraculously topping a treacherous group featuring former champions Italy, England, and Uruguay. For Brazil, the goal was simple: win the trophy on home soil and permanently erase the lingering ghosts of 1950. Instead, they plunged into a catastrophic new national trauma. In the semi-finals, they suffered a humiliating, earth-shattering 7-1 demolition at the hands of a rampant Germany. The nation was left wondering what might have been after their talisman Neymar was brutally ruled out of the tournament with a fractured vertebra in the previous round. Adding insult to injury, German striker Miroslav Klose scored in that historic match to net his 16th World Cup goal, surpassing Brazil's own Ronaldo to become the highest scorer in tournament history. This masterclass of German football engineering culminated in the final, where Mario Götze struck a sublime extra-time winner past Lionel Messi's Argentina to claim the crown. Joachim Löw's diverse, multicultural squad was widely celebrated back home as a triumphant symbol of successful social integration. The sheer intensity of the final was encapsulated by Germany's Christoph Kramer. After suffering a severe concussion in the 14th minute, he played on until the 32nd minute in a complete daze, eventually walking up to referee Nicola Rizzoli to frantically ask if he was actually playing in the World Cup final. Hosted by Russia for the very first time, the 2018 edition proved completely merciless to the defending champions as Germany crashed out in the group stage. It marked the first time the German powerhouse had failed to clear the opening round since 1938. They weren't alone in their misery. Traditional heavyweights, Italy, failed to qualify for the first time since 1958, while the Netherlands and the United States also shockingly missed out on the tournament entirely. This World Cup fundamentally altered the sport with the official debut of the Video Assistant Referee, VAR. It also witnessed the historic implementation of the fair play tiebreaker rule for teams finishing dead level on points and goal difference. This rule famously allowed Japan to advance from Group H simply because they had accumulated fewer yellow cards than a heartbroken Senegal. In a devastating blow for the continent, it was the first time since 1982 that not a single African nation reached the knockout rounds. Meanwhile, the back of the net was under siege from within, as a record-breaking 12 own goals were scored throughout the tournament. The undisputed narrative of the summer belonged to Croatia, surviving back-to-back penalty shootouts against Denmark and Russia, and grinding out an extra-time epic against England. The Balkan nation marched into their first ever World Cup final. This was a tournament that emphatically prioritized raw athleticism, high-pressing intensity, and physical endurance over the aging philosophy of tiki-taka, which saw Spain's system completely stall. Croatia's relentless physical conditioning stunned the footballing elite, defying every pundit's prediction to reach the showpiece match. While England's Harry Kane secured the Golden Boot, the grand finale was contested between Croatia and a clinical France, powered by a 19-year-old phenom named Kylian Mbappe, who completely electrified the globe. France looked the class apart at every turn. Striking with ruthless efficiency, France overwhelmed Croatia 4-2 to claim the crown, with Mbappe, Antoine Griezmann, and Paul Pogba all getting on the scoresheet to form the brilliant creative spine of the champions. Manager Didier Deschamps engineered the victory through flawless control football, brilliantly deploying defensive midfielder Blaise Matuidi out on the left wing to stifle opponents. Securing their second world title since 1998, this frighteningly young French squad sent an ominous warning to the rest of the footballing world for the decade to come. With the blistering summer heat making a traditional tournament in the heart of the Qatari desert completely impossible, the World Cup was dramatically shifted to the winter for the first time in history. Domestic leagues were abruptly halted mid-season, creating an air of uncertainty and chaos as the 2022 tournament kicked off. It was also the first World Cup to feature the post-pandemic 5-substitution rule. While purists initially viewed the winter spectacle with heavy skepticism, the absolute theatre that unfolded on the pitch quickly silenced every critic. Qatar suffered the ignominy of becoming the first host nation to lose an opening match, eventually bowing out rock bottom without a single point. The tournament featured the emotional return of Christian Eriksen, who had suffered a terrifying cardiac arrest at Euro 2020, though his Denmark side massively disappointed by finishing last in Group D. Germany suffered another catastrophic failure, finishing behind Japan and Spain to be dumped out in the group stage for the second consecutive tournament. Elsewhere, Cameroon pulled off a historic upset against Brazil, celebrated by a dramatic Vincent Aboubakar winner, who was hilariously sent off after receiving a second yellow card for ripping off his shirt in pure ecstasy. Brazil electrified the early stages, highlighted by Richarlison's breathtaking acrobatic volley and their viral pigeon dance celebrations alongside manager Tite. Neymar seemed to have punched their ticket to the semi-finals with a sensational solo goal in the 105th minute against Croatia, but a resilient Croatian side struck back late, ultimately shattering Brazilian hearts in a clinical penalty shootout. A devastated Neymar would later confess, "It felt like I was attending my own funeral." Meanwhile, a massive tactical drama unfolded in the Portuguese camp as manager Fernando Santos boldly dropped Cristiano Ronaldo to the bench for the knockout rounds. Their campaign unraveled in the quarter-finals when a gravity-defying header from Youssef En-Nesyri sent Portugal crashing out. Morocco emerged as the romance of the tournament, carving out an immortal piece of history as the first African nation to ever reach a World Cup semi-final. Their iron-willed, fearless defensive display won the absolute admiration of the globe. In the other bracket, France defied the modern curse, becoming the first defending champion to clear the group stage since Brazil in 2006. But the overarching narrative of the winter belonged to Lionel Messi, arriving in Qatar determined to capture the one elusive crown missing from his legendary resume. Riding a spectacular 36-match unbeaten streak, Argentina arrived as heavy favorites, only to suffer one of the most shocking upsets in football history by dropping their opening match 2-1 to Saudi Arabia. Yet, this humiliation triggered a magnificent awakening. Manager Lionel Scaloni boldly swapped out a struggling Lautaro Martinez for the tireless energy of Julian Alvarez, shifting the team into overdrive. Their quarter-final clash against the Netherlands turned into an absolute war of attrition, forever remembered as the Battle of Lusail. Despite a dramatic late brace from Dutch substitute Wout Weghorst that forced extra time, Argentina kept their nerve to advance in a highly volatile penalty shootout. This set the stage for a truly historic final against France. Argentina looked to be cruising with a comfortable 2-0 lead, only for Kylian Mbappe to turn the game on its head, hammering home two sensational goals in an explosive 90-second window after the 80-minute. The extra time period was pure cinema, with both Messi and Mbappe exchanging dramatic goals. In the dying seconds of the match, Argentina's Emiliano Martinez pulled off a miraculous, era-defining spread-eagled save against Kolo Muani, sending the final to penalties. Stepping up with flawless execution, Argentina claimed the crown. 36 long years after Diego Maradona lifted the trophy, Lionel Messi finally secured his destiny, hoisting the World Cup into the night sky as an immortal national hero. Messi swept the individual honors with a majestic 7 goals and 3 assists, while Mbappe became the first man since 1966 to score a hat-trick in a World Cup final, though it proved a heartbreaking consolation. With a staggering 172 goals scored, it went down as the highest-scoring World Cup in history. Which World Cup memory is forever burned into your mind? Let us know in the comments below.